Okay, so are you ready to dive into some seriously fascinating stuff today?
Always up for a deep dive, especially when it comes to the Quran.
Right. So today we're jumping into Juzes 22.
Okay, sounds good.
Specifically, we're looking at surahs Al-Azab, Saba, Fatir, and Yasin. And let me tell you, these surahs are packed with all sorts of stuff. Guidance for believers, stories of prophets, reflections on Allah's power. It's going to be quite the journey.
You're right, it's a really captivating mix of like the spiritual and the practical. We'll see how the Quran addresses everyday life, like social interactions, those sorts of things. Alongside these really profound theological concepts is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's not every day you get to delve into guidelines specifically for the Prophet Muhammad's wives. I mean, what a unique situation. I was really struck by the emphasis on modesty.
Honesty.
Yeah, and how they dressed and how they interacted with men, basically. They were expected to set an example for other believers.
Exactly. And this really shows how the Quran's revelations weren't just about these abstract beliefs. They were offering guidance on how to actually live your life day to day in a way that lines up with faith. And the verses about the prophet's wives really give us a glimpse into that.
So it's not just a set of rules for the sake of having rules, but rather like a way of life, a code of conduct.
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting when we zoom out from the prophet's household and look at the guidelines for all Muslim men and women. The Quran is very clear. Obedience, truthfulness, patience, charity, these are the most important qualities. And I think it's worth noting how the emphasis is on both men and women.
I was just going to say, there seems to be a strong sense of equality there. Both genders are held to the same standard, and they're both considered equally capable of spiritual growth.
Yeah.
It's not always a message you hear in religious texts.
That's a really good point. And I think it speaks to the Quran's timeless message of justice, of balance. But it's not all just guidelines and principles, of course. The Quran is full of these incredible stories that really bring those ideas to life.
Okay, so tell me, what's a story that you found really captivating?
Well, the story of Zaid and Zainab, for example, is one that always seems to spark debate. But I think it's so crucial for understanding the Quran's role in addressing existing social norms.
Zaid and Zainab. Okay, remind me who they were again.
Right, so Zaid was actually the prophet's freed slave, but he was also incredibly close to him, almost like a son. When Zaid's marriage to Zainab fell apart, the Quran revealed that it was permissible for the prophet to marry her.
Okay.
And this was a huge deal because it broke a major social taboo at the time, marrying your adopted son's ex-wife.
Wow, yeah, that's definitely not something you see every day, especially back then. It makes you think about the kind of courage it would have taken to challenge beliefs that were so deeply ingrained in society.
Absolutely. That's a key takeaway here. The Quran wasn't afraid to challenge the way things were, even when it came to these really deeply held customs. It's like it reminds us that even the things we think are set in stone should be looked at again through the lens of divine guidance.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating mix of personal guidance and societal reform, which I guess makes sense given the context of when these verses were revealed. But it's not all just specific to that time and place, is it? There's this universal theme of prophets and messengers that resonates across so many different religions.
That's so true. And the Quran stresses this, really highlighting how important these individuals were in getting Allah's message out there.
Yeah.
Their unwavering faith, their courage, their complete reliance on Allah. It's something that speaks to people of all faiths, really.
It makes me think about that constant reminder in the Quran to, what's the word, dhikr, to remember Allah.
Yes. Dick, and you're right, it pops up again and again throughout the Quran, but it's not just about saying the words, it's about being in that state of awareness, of always being connected to the divine. So it's more than just going through the motions. It's about really feeling that connection in everything you do.
You got it. It's about having Allah at the front of your mind, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
Letting that awareness guide every interaction, every decision, your whole being, really. And this idea of dhikr, of remembrance, I think it really connects to those stories of the prophets, don't you think?
Yeah, totally. It's like they were the embodiment of that constant state of remembrance, even when things got tough. And speaking of stories, what about Surah Saba? I have to admit, I found that one so captivating. It felt, I don't know, timeless.
It really is. And what I think makes it so compelling is how it uses this historical story to draw parallels to our lives today. The people of Saba, they had it made,
Yeah.
resources, technology, but they took it all for granted.
Classic case of forgetting to be grateful for what you've got.
Exactly. And it ultimately led to their downfall. It's that age-old story, right?
Yeah.
Arrogance, thinking it'll last forever. It's a good reminder that no matter what we achieve or how much stuff we collect, true fulfillment. It comes from being grateful, from aligning ourselves with something bigger than ourselves.
You said it. Aligning with a higher purpose, that's a great way to put it. And it actually leads us perfectly into the stories of prophets David and Solomon. Now, those are some truly awe-inspiring figures.
David and Solomon, oh man, talk about legendary. I mean, David shaping iron with his bare hands, Solomon commanding the wind and the jinn. Sounds made up, doesn't it?
It's incredible, right? But here's the thing. Even with those amazing abilities, gifts from Allah, the Quran emphasizes that true knowledge, true power, it all comes back to Allah.
So it's not just about the miracles, it's about understanding where those abilities came from in the first place.
Exactly. They were chosen to carry out Allah's will, not to be worshipped as gods themselves. And that brings us to a really important point about who Allah is.
Which, if I'm remembering correctly, is a major theme in all these sutras we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And the way it describes his power is just,
Yeah.
wow, holding the heavens and the earth, creating everything from nothing. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. The Quran uses this incredibly vivid imagery to help us feel awe and understand just how powerful and majestic Allah is.
It's like when you try to wrap your head around the concept of infinity. It's beyond what we can really grasp. But those descriptions, they give us a little peek into that vastness. It's humbling, to say the least.
Totally agree. And I think that sense of humility is so important because it leads us to another key theme in these surahs, the Day of Judgment.
Okay, the Day of Judgment. Now we're getting into some serious stuff. It feels so final, so absolute. And the Quran doesn't sugarcoat it, does it?
It doesn't. It's described as this momentous, inevitable event where every single person will be held accountable for the choices they made, the good, the bad, everything in between. It's a really powerful reminder that our actions matter.
It's not just about following a checklist of rules, is it? It's about what's in your heart. It's about being compassionate and striving to embody those good qualities we talked about earlier.
You're exactly right. It's about recognizing that our actions have consequences, not just in this life, but in the hereafter as well. And this idea of being accountable for your actions ties into this other fascinating concept in the Quran, the trust.
The trust. Okay, now you have to explain that one because I'm drawing a blank. What's that all about?
So picture this. Allah offered this huge responsibility, this trust to all of creation. The heavens, the earth, even mountains, they all couldn't handle it. It was too much. But humans, we, with all our flaws and imperfections, our ability to do good and bad, we accepted it.
Wow, that's a lot to process. What do you think it says about us, about human nature, that we were the ones who took on that responsibility?
That's a question that's been debated for centuries. But I think deep down, it shows the incredible potential that every single person has within them. We have this immense capacity for love, for compassion, for justice.
But we're also capable of such destruction, such selfishness. It's like we carry both extremes within us all the time.
Exactly. And the trust, the responsibility that we have, it represents that duality. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose to build or to destroy, to lift others up, or to tear them down.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
that's a lot to think about. And it's amazing to me how these sutras cover so much ground. We've got history, philosophy, law, morality, even hints of science. And it's all woven together in this incredible tapestry of belief and practice.
It really is. And that interconnectedness, I think that's a defining feature of Islamic thought. It emphasizes that faith isn't something separate from the rest of your life. It's a part of every single thing. What you think, what you do, every interaction.
It's about recognizing that our actions, they don't just impact us. They have ripple effects on everything and everyone around us.
Beautifully put. And it brings us back to that really profound concept of the trust. We've been given this incredible gift, this duty to care for ourselves, for other people, and for this planet. And how we choose to fulfill that responsibility, well, that's up to each and every one of us.
It really is a lot to think about. And you're right, it makes you think about those big questions, doesn't it? Like, what's the point of it all? What happens after we die? It almost feels like the Quran isn't just meant to be read, but to really be thought about,
I think you've hit on something really important there. It's not about blindly accepting things, but about engaging with the message, letting it challenge you. And yeah, sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable, but that's where real growth happens, right?
Totally. It's like it's inviting you to have a conversation with it, to wrestle with those big questions, not just taking it at face value.
Exactly. And that conversation, it's not limited to just the words on the page. It's about connecting it to the world around us, to your own life, the choices you're making every day.
So it's about more than just memorizing verses. It's about letting them actually influence the way you live,
Right. It's about understanding the principles behind those verses and finding ways to live them out in your own life in a way that feels real and true to you.
which brings us back to that idea of dhikr, of remembering Allah. It's like this constant thread throughout everything, reminding us to stay connected.
Exactly. Aligning ourselves with the divine and letting that connection guide us in everything we do.
It's amazing how these suttas bring together so many different things. We're talking about history, philosophy, law, morality, even like hints of science. It's mind-blowing.
It really is. And that interconnectedness, it's really at the heart of Islamic thought. It emphasizes that faith isn't just one part of your life, it's a part of everything.
It's about recognizing that our choices, our actions, they have these ripple effects, impacting not just us, but the people around us and the world we live in.
Beautifully said. And that ties back into this profound concept of the trust. We've been given this incredible gift, this responsibility to care for each other and for this planet. And how we decide to fulfill that responsibility, well, that's a question each of us has to answer.
It's humbling when you think about it, the kind of power we have as human beings, and how important it is to use that power for good.
It really is. And it's a call to action, It's not enough to just acknowledge it. We have to live it out in our daily lives.
As we're talking about this, I keep thinking back to the story of Solomon. Here's a guy who had everything: power, wealth, incredible wisdom. But even he acknowledged that his knowledge was nothing compared to Allah's.
It's a good reminder, isn't it, that no matter how much we learn or achieve, we're always going to be face to face with the unknown. There's always something bigger than us, something beyond what we can fully grasp.
And for believers, that something bigger is Allah, right? It's about recognizing that we're not the center of the universe and learning to trust in something beyond ourselves.
Exactly. And that understanding, it can be incredibly freeing. When we can let go of the need to control everything, to have all the answers, it allows us to experience faith in a whole new way.
It's about surrendering to something greater than ourselves, even if we don't fully understand it.
Yeah.
And that act of surrender can be really powerful.
You're exactly right. It's when we let go of our ego, our need to always be right, that we can truly connect with something greater than ourselves.
It's like that idea that faith is a leap of trust, choosing to believe even when we don't have all the answers.
Exactly. And that takes courage. It means stepping outside our comfort zones and embracing the unknown.
And sometimes that means confronting our own mortality, which is something these surahs don't shy away from.
That's true. They encourage us to think about our own mortality, to remember that our time here is limited.
It's a little daunting when you think about it, but it's also a powerful reminder to make the most of the time we have, to live with purpose.
And to remember that our actions have consequences that extend far beyond this life.
Which brings us back to those descriptions of paradise and hell. It's like we're being given a glimpse of what could be, depending on the choices we make.
Those descriptions are meant to inspire us, but it's important to remember that they're just that, descriptions, limited by human language.
So we can't really understand what paradise or hell are truly like until we experience them for ourselves.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what makes it so intriguing. There's a mystery to it, an element of the unknown that keeps us striving, keeps us seeking.
It's like we're always searching for something more, something that's just beyond our reach.
Precisely. And that longing, that desire for something greater than ourselves, I think that's something we all experience. And it's something that the Quran speaks to beautifully.
It's like a roadmap, a guidebook for how to navigate this life and prepare for what comes next.
And that journey, it all starts with a single step, a single choice. The question is, what choice will you make today?
That's a powerful question. And you know what else is so fascinating about these surahs? They're both deeply personal and incredibly universal.
What do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, they're speaking to a specific group of people at a specific point in history. But the themes, faith, doubt, temptations, seeking forgiveness, those are experiences that transcend time and cultures.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes the Quran so timeless. It speaks to the core of the human experience, no matter who you are or what you believe.
It's like it's tapping into something much deeper, something that connects us all.
Exactly. And that connection, it goes beyond just our shared humanity. It points to our desire for something greater than ourselves, something to have faith in.
And for believers, that's a law. It's about recognizing that we're not in control and surrendering to a power greater than ourselves.
Beautifully put. And that surrender, it's not about weakness or blind obedience. It's about understanding our place in the universe and having faith in the wisdom of our Creator.
It's about holding on to faith even when things are tough, even when we don't understand what's happening.
Exactly. And that kind of faith, it takes patience, perseverance, and a willingness to believe even when it's difficult.
But the rewards of that trust, they can be incredible. It can lead to a sense of peace, of knowing that you're not alone on this journey.
You're right. It's about recognizing that even in our darkest moments, even when we feel lost and alone, Allah is there with us.
It's a comforting thought. It's something we can all draw strength from, especially when we're struggling.
Yeah.
So even though these surahs talk about some heavy stuff, ultimately they leave you feeling hopeful, don't you think?
Absolutely. They're a reminder that even when things are difficult, there's always light at the end of the tunnel.
It's about remembering who we are, why we're here, and what really matters.
You said it. And it's something worth thinking about long after we're done with this deep dive.
It's incredible how these surahs manage to be like deeply personal and universal at the same time. They really make you think about what it means to be human.
You've put it perfectly. And, speaking of those universal themes, one that really stood out to me in these surahs is legacy. What we leave behind when we're gone.
Oh, that's interesting.
Not just in terms of like material possessions, but our actions, the impact we have on the world.
That's so true. It makes you think about those ripple effects we were talking about before. Like the choices we make today, they don't just disappear, do they? They have this way of echoing into the future.
Exactly. And these suttas, they encourage us to really consider those echoes. Are we building things up or are we tearing them down? Are we leaving behind a legacy of like kindness, compassion, fairness, or are we adding to the pain and division that's already out there?
It's a question we all have to ask ourselves, I think. No matter what our beliefs are, we all have this responsibility to leave the world a better place than we found it.
I couldn't agree more. And the Quran gives us a framework for how to actually do that. It's not just about being devout on a personal level. It's about fighting for justice, caring for the vulnerable, standing up for what's right, even when it's hard.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And, hearing you talk about all of this, it makes me think about Dhikr again, that idea of remembering Allah.
Yes, Dhikr. It's like, it's like a compass, It keeps you grounded in what's important, keeps your priorities straight, especially in the middle of all the craziness of life.
It's about reminding yourself what really matters and making sure your actions line up with your values. In a world that feels so focused on stuff, on the here and now, that message is so important.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the beauty of the Quran. It speaks to those timeless parts of being human. It reminds us that we're not just physical beings, we're spiritual beings. We all have this longing for meaning, for a connection to something bigger than ourselves.
And for people of faith, that something bigger is Allah, right? And that connection, it gives our lives so much meaning, don't you think?
It really does. And you know what? It brings us back to that amazing idea of the trust. Humans, we've been given this incredible gift, this responsibility to care for this world, to be stewards of creation.
It's an amazing thought, isn't it? That makes you really stop and think about the impact you have on everything around you, the people you love, future generations. What kind of ancestors do we want to be,
That's the question, isn't it? And I think the Quran gives a pretty clear answer. It challenges us to step up, to be the best versions of ourselves, not just for our own good, but for everyone and everything around us.
That's something that really resonates with me, because at the end of the day, I think everyone wants to live a life of purpose, to leave the world a better place.
You've said it perfectly. And the Quran, it offers a way to do that. It's a guide for dealing with all the ups and downs of life, for making choices that are true to who you are, and for leaving behind something that really matters.
This whole journey through these surahs has been incredible. I feel like I have a completely new perspective, not just on the Quran, but on life in general.
I feel the same way. It's been such a privilege to dive into these ideas with you and hear your insights.
And to our listeners, we hope that this deep dive has sparked something in you, that you feel inspired to explore these verses for yourselves and discover the wisdom they hold.
Because ultimately, the Quran is a gift, and the more we open ourselves up to it, the more we let it challenge us, the more we get back from it.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. If the Quran is like a mirror reflecting humanity back at ourselves, what does it show you?
Yeah.
What does it tell you about your own heart, your aspirations, your place in the world?
Take some time. Think about it. Let the journey unfold.